Now we continue with Mr. Brendan Brown.
All right, hi everybody, great to be here. So what I'm going to take you through now is some of the research that we've been looking at in developing a more nuanced and creating a bit more understanding around how we understand adoption and uptake of conservation agriculture in Eastern and Southern Africa. The work that I'm presenting comes from an analysis of household data sets that were collected by CIMMIT in the SINLESA program. And so we'd like to thank CIMMIT for making that data available on their online data repository. So just to give a baseline for the rest of this discussion, what we did was first apply a binary classification of adoption. And that is to say that a farmer is either an adopter if they use some form of CA, or they're a non-adopter if they don't. And most studies that look at the adoption of CA will use something similar to this to classify adoption, although there's often a lot of ambiguity about where we actually draw the line in a yes or no outcome. But when we applied this, we found that we would consider there to be quite substantial adoption of conservation agriculture across these 5 countries. 4 countries there above 89% adoption. But for those of us that are working in Africa, I think that we might say that maybe this is a little bit misleading. And so what we wanted to do was to go a little bit deeper. So to go beyond that yes or no binary adoption and try and get a bit more understanding around what's actually occurring on the ground. And so to do this, we're framing utilisation as a process as opposed to an outcome. And there's 3 specific things that we wanted to investigate there. So the first one is how intensively are farmers using CA? The second one is what stages of use and non-use are occurring? And the third one is what forms of CA are being implemented? So to that first one there, and that is intensity of CA use. So to do this, what we've done is we've proposed this framework, which is the Conservation Agriculture Appraisal Framework, or the CAF. So it looks a bit complex, there's a lot going on in it. But basically what we've done is we've taken the 3 components of CA there, so legume diversification, stover cover and minimum tillage, and we've set a full use threshold. That allows us to, at a plot level, score a plot between 0 or no use and 1, which is to threshold use, or in between to understand that intensity of use. We can also take the average of those 3 and we'll get a conservation agriculture intensity of use index at the plot level. But we know we need to go beyond the plot level to understand farmer behaviour and decision making. So what we've done is we've weighted those plot indices against the proportion of the farm, summed them all together, and then we get a farm level index of intensity of use. So what's presented up here now is the bottom right-hand corner there, which is the farm intensity of CA. And what we've found that although we had 4 countries with greater than 89% adoption of CA, the intensity of use is really limited. So in Ethiopia, it was just 6%, the average intensity of use of CA. And in Tanzania and Mozambique, both the highest utilisers in terms of intensity, that was still just 40%. Importantly, farmers who applied CA on all of their land were actually considered statistical outliers, and we couldn't find them in Ethiopia, Kenya, or Mozambique. So the second aspect that we wanted to look at of utilisation is of the stages of CA use. So to do this, instead of saying adoption is an outcome, we said utilisation is a process. We broke that down into 10 stages and 4 phases. And that is to say that farmers first learn about CA, and then they might do some form of assessment, they might move to experimentation, and then they'll make a utilisation decision. Now that might be negative in the form of disadoption, or it might be positive in terms of modified utilisation, semi-utilisation, or total utilisation. So when we applied that to the same data set, what we found is this purple here is modified use. So basically, almost all use of CA is in modified forms. And you'll see that there's not a lot of green, light green or dark green up there, which is the semi and total use. So CA in its complete 3-factor form. Other things that you notice here, there's quite substantial red area, which is negative adoption. So farmers saying, no, CA is not for me. And particularly in Ethiopia, with the yellow, farmers are still not obtaining information on CA. So we've said now that intensity of use is quite low and that modified use dominates. So that leads to the question, well, what types of CA are actually being used by farmers? And so what we wanted to do was just to create a clear structure to understand the types of CA that were being applied. And this is particularly important for CA because it's a complex and multi-component technology that often does get used. There's a lot of ambiguity around it. Sometimes people say minimum tillage is CA or zero tillage is CA, so we wanted to be quite clear to understand the actual types of CA that were being used. So again, we apply this to the data set, and what we actually found was only 0.3% of plots would be considered CA adoption under the FAO definition of simultaneous application of all three components of CA. Even if we were to loosen our definition and say just all three components practice in whatever manner, that was still just 0.8% of plots. Importantly, there was 52% of plots that actually didn't have any component of CA practiced on them. And one of the ones that stuck out there was the red area with minimum tillage. So just 2.7% of plots had minimum tillage on them, despite minimum tillage being the bedrock of most CA systems. So to investigate that minimum tillage a little bit further, what we did was we applied our second framework there, the PAF, the stages of use, to try and understand what was happening with minimum tillage. So as we can see here, there's a lot of yellow there, and that yellow suggests that farmers haven't yet received information or aren't obtaining information on minimum tillage. So they're not to the point of even evaluating minimum tillage yet because they haven't received enough information. But more so, once farmers actually obtain information on minimum tillage, they're not progressing to full use. So that is the dark green or the total use. In fact, what's actually occurring is farmers are negatively evaluating, so that's the red area. They're saying, well, no, CA is not for me, I know about it, it's not for me. Or particularly the blue area there, right after the red, and that is interest with no use. So these are farmers that are saying, I've obtained enough information about CA, I want to do it, it's something that will benefit me, but I'm not actually applying it at the moment. So to bring this back all together, and the title of the presentation is Adoption versus Utilisation. So we said adoption of CA in a simple binary classification is 79% across the 5 countries. But when we looked at intensity of use, we found that the average farm intensity of CA was just 6 to 40%. When we looked at the stages of use, we found that less than 1% of farmers would be considered total utilisers, and that 99% of CA use was in modified form. Beyond that, we found that more than 50% of farmers and up to 70% in Ethiopia still had limited awareness of minimum tillage and hadn't reached the stage of evaluation. And when we looked at the types of CA, we found that just 0.3% of plots practiced complete total CA, and 52% of plots had no components of CA on them. So what does that mean? Well, the first one is I hope I've shown to you that binary classifications of adoption can be a little bit misleading, and we do need to go deeper than just saying that it's a yes or no outcome. And when we expand that to activities and promotion of CA, there needs to be a movement beyond just achieving adoption, but it needs to be looking at how are we going to intensify the use of CA and CA components. So at the moment we're very focused on having a small plot of CA, and a farmer will expand that plot over time. And what we've found through these results is that it's more likely that they're going to use modified components of CA and build their intensity of use over time. So extension systems, research systems need to shift their thinking a bit more beyond just binary adoption. So that's all I've got for you. I'd just like to quickly thank the CIMMYT, well, the sponsors of this research, but particularly CIMMYT for providing the data sets on their online repository, and also for providing some funding for us to explore the reasons for these trends, which is up on some posters outside. So we've got 3 posters up there. If you do want more information, I've got a few handouts of the frameworks, and this was published earlier in the year. Well, some of this was published earlier in the year in Ag Systems. But please do come and have a chat. I don't speak any Spanish, so it'll be quite a boring conference for me if I'm not interacting with you guys. Thanks.